Hey folks, Brittany here. Today we are going to be looking at tornado preparedness, so stay tuned for that. Camp life. It's the smell of a warm fire and a hot cooked meal.
It's everything you'll learn.
The places you'll explore.
And the friends you'll meet along the way.
I'm Brittany.
And I'm Augie.
Join us on our quest to learn everything we can about the natural world.
Exploring what it takes to live by nature's rules.
Through skills, stories, and adventure.
This is
Berries and Bushcraft. So today I'm going to be doing the video alone. Augie is currently doing a martial arts camp via Zoom, kind of interesting. And so today I have a special topic for us. We are going to be looking at tornado preparedness. The reason I chose this topic today was because we just all got in the Ottawa area a tornado warning on our cell phones. It's a cool new thing that Environment Canada has been doing for a couple of years. One of the first tornado warnings we ever got was actually on the way to our wedding. And the area on that particular day before our wedding was devastated by 6 tornadoes. Of course, this is a pretty normal thing for you know, certain places in, say, the Midwest or, you know, Texas, where I have a lot of family and my mother's from. But it's not very normal here in Ontario. It's actually very abnormal. As a kid growing up in southern Ontario, I often asked my mom about things like volcanoes and earthquakes and tornadoes and, you know, various types of natural disasters that I'd heard about that I was very anxious about. And one of the things that my mom told me at the time was that we didn't have to worry because we lived in Ontario, and that meant we didn't get things like tornadoes. However, over the last several years with climate change, that is no longer true. Over the last few years, we've gotten at least one tornado pretty much every year. That same tornado episode with the 6 tornadoes ripped through a farm right next to our camp. Amazingly, our teepee and our wigwam stood strong. So, you know, our canvas, you know, natural built structures were perfectly fine, but it blew down a neighboring barn with the crazy winds that we had. So very interesting, very interesting. I wonder if it had something to do with the genius of circular structures in terms of dissipating wind. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. So today I would like to talk about tornado preparedness, because especially in this part of the world, we're starting to get this kind of thing more and more, and we're needing to know how to be prepared. So I'd like to share some of the things with you that my mother shared with me as a child, because she wasn't able to get rid of my fears of tornadoes, so she did have to, you know, prepare me for them. And so today we are going to be looking at disaster preparedness, specifically with regards to tornado, but there's some general principles that work for all of the possible disasters we might face. And I'm curious to know how many of you out there have heard of the Japanese term Bosai, spelled B-O-S-A-I. Bosai. It is a term that means reducing the risk of disaster. In other words, disaster preparedness. And of course, Japan, you know, being in a place where they get risk of earthquakes, tsunami, like there's so many possible disasters that can happen in Japan at any given moment that it's very interesting to me that as a culture, there's a single word that means disaster preparedness. That tells you how important it is to this culture. But it's a concept that's useful to adapt pretty much anywhere around the world. And so, in particular with regards to tornadoes, there's a few things that we need to know. So first of all, we should probably look at the indoor environment. So many of us have seen The Wizard of Oz, and one of the things that they do early on in the movie when the twister's coming, there's a twister coming, is that they all head to the cellar. And part of the reason that Dorothy gets, you know, swooped up in this tornado is because she wasn't able to get underground. So that tells us that one of the safest places to be in a house is, if possible, underground, right? You would like to be somewhere down there, and that's in part because the force of the tornado, this is gonna be fun, the force of the tornado goes straight across. It's not gonna dip down suddenly. And so the safest place being in the basement. Now, of course, if you are in the basement, and you have, say, a small room, like a bathroom or closet, then this is an even more safe space to be than just generally in the basement. And so if you can even make that more safe by going into the bathroom or the closet and dragging something like a mattress over top of you. This is a terrible drawing, I'm sorry, but you get the idea. So if you put something like a mattress over top of you, then if something happens to your house and structurally it kind of shakes around and anything falls, then you have a bit more protection added over top of you. Of course, if you do not have a small room like this, then any kind of getting into any kind of doorway, there's often extra structural support within the doorway. And the same principles apply if you, for instance, don't have a basement. If you are in a bungalow or in an apartment and you don't have that kind of thing, then again, a small room or a doorway, especially if you can get something like a mattress or even just like couch cushions or anything like that over top of you, then this will help. Now this looks at indoors, and so obviously ideal is to be in this type of situation, but in a disaster you don't always have the time to prepare for that kind of thing, right? And so in a similar way then, if you are outdoors, suddenly you don't have access to something like a doorway or a basement usually, right? So for instance, at our kids camp, shortly after that episode of 6 tornadoes in one day, and we talked about how it had blown down the barn beside. A lot of the kids saw that barn blown down on the way in. There was a lot of talk about it. So we actually did that whole day's class on tornado preparedness. And so one of the things we were talking about was using these types of same principles if you're outdoors and you're not anywhere near a building. Because of course this was one of my preoccupations at the age of 4 is, oh my gosh, what happens if I don't have a basement? What if? Kids are good like that. So one of the things my mom had told me at that point was that if you have a road, for instance, often there's some kind of ditch that you can get into. This is a pretty terrible ditch, but I'm working on it, right? So say this is grass, and this is some kind of ditch that allows the water to go off the road, right? In this type of case, even a ditch about this big, if you go down and you lie in it, then a tornado, in theory, will go directly over top of you and actually not suck you up. So I don't actually know if this is true. I have not tested it out myself and gone out to find a tornado to stick myself in a ditch to make sure I didn't get sucked up. However, in the South, where they have plenty more tornadoes every year than we do here in Ontario, this is considered one of the safer options if you are out in kind of a long, out in like the fields and all you have is, a small ditch like that. And what happens if you don't have a ditch but have, say, some rolling hills, for instance, or even a cliff? If there's like, I don't know, this is kind of a hill and then this is kind of like a cliff side, this is jagged rocks going off this way, okay? Then you could find yourself, hiding down here up against this, because this is the hill. As the tornado goes this way, it's going to then go over the edge of the cliff and slowly make its way down to the flat ground over here, so you're going to be more safe up against something like this. And so, of course, out at our camp, we don't have any ditches right there. We also don't have any cliffs right there accessible. So one of the exercises we did was looking at the landscape that we did have and thinking about where would be the safest probable place. And one of the places that the kids came up with was there was the farm with the, oh goodness, this is going to be terrible, I'm sorry, with the horse horses. I can draw a horse, I swear, just not that fast. You know, the stables with the horses up here, and our camp with our wigwam. You know what? Yeah, okay. Our wigwam is way down here, right? The big white pine is down here, and we have to walk quite far. And one of the things that the landscape does is it kind of gently slopes here and then continues on, and then there's a big pond and then the rest of our field. And so what the kids had decided, the safest place on that particular landscape where we're surrounded by tons and tons of flat farm fields, what the kids had decided the safest place to be was probably where the raspberries were, on that slope of that hill. And so it's not an ideal situation, right? If you have the time to get into a real ditch, a real hole below ground in some way, that's usually better, or up against something like a cliff. Again, that's probably better. But if you don't have those as an option, you got to be constantly thinking about where a good spot would be. And so, oopsies. Of course, you don't always have your ideal situation. You know, in any kind of an emergency, you're going to be caught generally semi-unprepared. But if you're always thinking in these ways and looking to prepare yourself for any possible case of emergency, it can actually become kind of a fun game. And yeah, it might just save your life. So we're going to move on. And so part of the concept of Bosai, like we talked about earlier, disaster preparedness, part of that concept is not just knowing what to do very specifically in the emergency, but thinking about the aftermath as well. And so something we're going to be talking about in our next video called 3 months no groceries, what we've learned, is the concept of disaster preparedness, always being prepared with enough food for a certain amount of time. And so in a tornado or emergency case scenario, most people aren't affected, right? You know, most people's houses aren't going to be ripped through with a tornado. Of course, some people will be, and it's impossible to predict who. But most people aren't. However, there's often residual effects, right? And so things like power outages might happen. And what happens in a power outage? Well, your fridge and your freezer might be affected as well. Similarly, you might not have lighting for a bit. So even if your house wasn't affected by a tornado too badly, you may be suffering power outages in the area. And so one of the things you can do is you can have plenty of candles, right? You can have plenty of candles on hand. Or, you know, you can always make sure that you have flashlights. I'm going to put a button there because otherwise you can't turn it on. Or you could even have, you know, those oil lamps. I'm going to put a handle on that. So you can even have an oil lamp, you know, any kind of lighting alternatives for while they're figuring out the power situation. In a similar way, if your fridge and your freezer go out, suddenly you have all this food to worry about. Now, you're not likely to have a tornado in the winter because that's the time where you could just put your stuff outside and it stays frozen or at least cold. But in the summertime and the late fall, it's the warm season that the tornadoes typically happen. And so that's when you have to worry about your food going bad. So some people would have like a backup generator, but honestly, what I would recommend is dehydration or canning or any of those food preservation methods that allow you to keep more food unrefrigerated for longer. You know, canning can last for several years unrefrigerated. Dehydration can honestly last, I mean, we recently had some dehydrated food that was 25 years old and it was fine. So dehydrated food, you don't have to buy them, you can make it yourself. And we'll talk a bit more about that in our next video, 3 months no groceries. And so one of the things you want to consider as well in terms of disaster preparedness is what not to do. And one of the things you don't want to do when it comes to tornadoes is run away. You do not want to run away. You do not want to try and outrun a tornado. It is gonna get you. You want to spend whatever time you have preparing yourself to probably have to endure nothing. But if you're trying to physically run, or you are trying to drive away, or things like that, like, it is faster than you, it is faster than your car, and it's unpredictable. Yeah, your time is better spent finding a safer place to kind of just hunker down. And another thing you don't want to do, especially in an outdoor environment, is hide behind a tree, right? Or anything like that. Like, that is not going to protect you. And if anything, even if it doesn't, come pick you in the tree up, the likelihood of having branches crack and fall down on your head is pretty high. So you don't want to. That's a branch, by the way. So you don't want to do that, right? And of course, perhaps the most important thing not to do in a emergency type of situation, tornado or otherwise, is to panic. No panicking. I'm gonna give that guy like a big tongue. So no panicking. We do not want any panicking. Panicking is the worst thing you can do because you are not going to be thinking clearly. You're going to do things that will actually put you and your family in danger. So the most important thing when this kind of thing happens, especially now that we have an early warning system for this kind of thing, is to take a breath and think about it, and then calmly, for the sake of you and everyone you love, proceed downstairs if you have one, or proceed into the bathroom. And while you're there, do your best to, like, I don't know, tell some stories or bring a deck of cards. You don't want to be suddenly running around, like, picking up your precious TV and dragging that into your bathroom with you. Like, that's not what's important in that moment. But something like a storybook or a deck of cards, if it's easily findable, totally okay, because you might be there for a while and it'll help keep people's mind off of everything, right? If you're listening to every little howl of the wind and creak of a branch and anything else that might be going on outside, you're just going to be making it worse for yourself. So the only thing you can do is make sure that you are in as safe place as possible and just wait out the storm. And so I hope this video gave you a little bit more confidence in terms of what to do, what not to do. Of course, in an emergency situation, there's not always a right answer, but there's certainly some answers that are better than some. Thanks for joining us. And again, next week we are going to be doing our long-awaited 3 months no groceries video. Taking a little longer than we expected because I unfortunately had to go to the hospital, and then editing and filming and everything has taken a lot longer than expected. But we are almost there, so I promise it's coming out in a few days. So stay tuned for that, and see you later.